guy that everybody likes and wants to have at the party. He's the guy that has to crack the whip. He's the guy that has to be decisive.
Ramaphosa's speech will be picked apart in graphic detail in Parliament when MPs debated in the coming days. Sidi Madia, Eyewitness News, Cape Town.
3 properties have been withdrawn from a Cape Town auction. The ANC had called on the city of Cape Town to halt the auctioning off of at least 18 properties. It says the land should rather be used for low-cost housing. Kaylin Palm reports.
The ANC's Cameron Dugmo says the battle is far from over.
We cannot have a situation where there's an ad hoc approach to selling city land or any municipal land for that matter without this land being included in a transparent, accessible land audit.
He says the recently launched campaign around a land audit and land release will continue. The City of Cape Town says the National Housing Development Agency has formally expressed interest in the property in Mitchell's Plain due for auction yesterday for mixed-use development by the private sector. The municipality adds they were also interested in 2 adjacent sites in Clement. The city says at no stage has national government expressed interest in the sites when notified in 2015 and 2019. Kaylin Palm, Eyewitness News.
And the US government is urging Canada to use its federal powers to end a blockade by truck drivers who are protesting COVID-19 restrictions and vaccines. President Joe Biden is being regularly briefed on the protests, which have hit Ottawa and a border crossing that generates a quarter of US-Canada trade. Carmakers and local authorities want an end to the blockade of the Ambassador Bridge. Gold's at $1,824 an ounce. The rand's at $15.13 to the dollar, $20.48 to the pound, $17.23 to the euro. Brent crude's at $91, 6 cents a barrel. Traffic lights are faulty in Parklands at Sandown and Parklands Main. In Belhar at Stellenbosch Arterial and Adam Tas. In Paula Park at Danafontein and Govan and Becky. And in the CBD at Lower Long and Walter Sisulu. Clear skies today. A moderate southerly wind with a high of 26. The top story in Eyewitness News. The President admits load shedding and unreliable power supply are driving away investment.
Eyewitness News. In touch, in tune, and independent. For the latest, download the EWN app.
The State of the Nation address made simple.
Sona in 60 minutes with Clement Manyathela
and Lester Kiewit on 702 and CapeTalk.
This
is CapeTalk.
Join the conversation.
It's 6 minutes after 10 o'clock. Melang, good morning. Welcome to this special broadcast. We are live on 702 and CapeTalk. This is also being streamed live on Facebook and YouTube. This is Sona in 60 minutes, and I'm Clement Manyathela. I'm going to be hosting this with my colleague, Lester Kiewit. President Cyril Ramaphosa, as you know, last night delivering the State of the Nation address at the City Hall here in Cape Town, striking an optimistic tone and making some key announcements and rallying everyone really to be together regardless of differences, to see the commitments that he is making be realized. He has given his government 100 days to finalize a social compact to grow the economy, to create jobs and combat hunger. So is 2022 really going to be a year of delivery?
Clement, thanks so much. We are joined here in studio live and also online by our colleague Mandy Wiener in Johannesburg, by Babalo Ndenzi, Eyewitness News parliamentary correspondent, senior political reporter Sidi Madia. Firstly, so very nice seeing all of you after a 2-year absence. I know you said last night, this SONA could have been delivered via email. Sidi.
Absolutely.
But it's so nice seeing everyone in person.
I think that's the only takeaway for me, is that it's so nice to see you all. It's not so nice to meet my colleagues at CapeTalk, and that's about it, really.
Oh, okay, well, we'll be unpacking various issues and various platforms that have come out of last night's State of the Nation address. We also, of course, open it up to you. We'll read some of your comments, maybe take a call or two. 011 883 0702 in Johannesburg, 021 446 0567. Mandy Wiener, good morning. How are you? Well, Mandy is smiling, which I know that means she can hear me. But Paulo and Denzi will eventually get to this Zoom future. Eventually we'll get to it. But Paulo, nice seeing you again. You've also been around the parliamentary precinct. You've been working there for years. There was an expectation that many people would start returning to the office this year, a almost near capacity State of the Nation. But then a disastrous fire at the parliamentary precinct on the 2nd of January. The image of showing that we have a parliament that's still working was top of the agenda for parliamentary officials and the Speaker and the National Council of Provinces chairperson. So presenting a SONA, whether it be in the Cape Town City Hall or not, was very important in terms of the image of the state for parliamentary officials yesterday, wasn't it?
Yes, indeed. I mean, when you look at the actual aesthetic of the City Hall, it is a fitting environment to hold such an occasion. It's a bit different to a National Assembly chamber, as it looks more almost like an auditorium, and the president is sitting there giving a memorial lecture. It doesn't have that, parliamentary as National Assembly feel, but it was definitely, a good looking, place to hold such a auspicious occasion. It is an august occasion, I guess, and the National Assembly is considered that. So as far as that is concerned, it was a good venue, and I wouldn't be surprised if, we might see more parliamentary, activity happening there because of the fire. I know the debates that are going to happen, as well as the president's response to the debate, will be happening there. And then other things will move back to the Good Hope Chamber in those other big venues in the legislature that survived the fire. But it did look at almost a sanitized environment when you look at the outside. There was a little bit of pomp and ceremony, with the brass band and the SANDF band, but it did look quite sanitized as compared to when we have it at the legislature. People are in close proximity. Even members of the public are able to stroll up and down the street and watch what's happening in the CBD. But this time around, it really didn't look like that. And maybe some people would want it to be like that, less, fancy and, more straight to the point.
And it costs less.
Less, yeah.
From what I felt, because of the layout of that auditorium, it's different from across the aisle. If political parties and MPs have a distance from each other, from the president, it's far easy to shout out a heckle, to raise a point of order. But being in that setting, I think it also neutralized maybe even emotions and tempers.
Yes, it almost reminds me of the British Parliament, where they're so close to each other in that chamber, and it will be interesting to see how the debate goes when everyone is sitting on top of each other.
I'm interested in that and feeling the debate when it's heated, when they're so close to one another.
Let's just jump straight into some of the topics that we want to discuss. What was big in terms of the small little leaks, the reports about what the president is going to say about social protection? Clement, you spoke to the finance minister,
Enoch Godongwana, because the big debate just before the State of the Nation address, and this is where we'll probably bring in our colleague Mandy Wiener. The big debate was whether there is going to be an announcement on the basic income grant, even if it's not an announcement that says from next year it's going to start, but some form of commitment. But we didn't get that from the president. He only announced that the relief grant is going to be extended for a year. No commitment on big, but he did say that further support for the poor must pass the test of affordability and must not come at the expense of the basic services or at the risk of unsustainable spending. I asked the Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana, about this last night, and here is what he had to say. When, and in terms of just the feasibility, Minister, when can we see the implementation of the basic income grant? Because as deployees of the ANC, that's what you've been mandated to do for some time now.
No, not to my knowledge. by the way, not to my knowledge.
The ANC Lekgotla just last 2 weeks ago said...
There's one commission, another commission says something else. So we have got to synthesize that. The Lekgotla make recommendations to the National Executive Committee. So let me just say, the basic income grant is not an agreed thing. Everyone would like it, by the way. I would also like it. Subject to affordable, the question is whether the economy can afford a basic income grant, depending again on the level we have to pack it. If, for instance, you are saying a basic income grant is 400 rand per month, I don't know, and we must continue with it. And then the next stage, South Africans may have to face, how are we going to find it? Are we going to increase taxes and so on? No one is in essence is saying no. The question is, how are we going to finance it, and whether the economy can afford it? That's a debate.
So as it stands now, we cannot afford it in the next 5-10 years?
Not in the next 2 years. I can tell you now, not in the next 2 years.
So, Mandiwina, what did you make of the president extending the 350 for a year, not really making a commitment on the basic income grant, even though the ANC Lekgotla was clear, and probably other ANC Lekgotlas over the last 10 years have been saying, guys, you are our deployees, give effect to this resolution that we must see some form of social protection. The Minister of Finance is basically saying, yeah, that's desirable, but we don't have the funds for it, and it's not going to happen in a short term.
Well, that's classic Cyril Ramaphosa, isn't it? So we were expecting him to do something, but he's not actually doing it because he wants to consult further. So we've got the extended 350 Rand social grant now, but we don't have a clear direction on a basic income grant, even though there is this policy directive to do it. And yesterday I spoke to Isabel Fry, who's been an advocate of the basic income grant, saying that it's actually going to stimulate the economy. It's not going to slow down economic growth. And yet we still have this dilly-dallying and the need to consult further, Clement.
Tidi, the president is essentially mandated by his party, by the NEC, as part of a party resolution to implement a basic income grant. But then at the same time, a member of the NEC, who's also head of economics within the party, Enoch Onegwana, says we can't afford it. So is there a duality between what is the instruction from a party resolution to what is the reality that Cyril Ramaphosa and his finance minister sees in the balance books?
I think what we've always known is that what the ANC wants or what the ANC sees as a picture is at odds with the reality of South Africans. And he's always had this fine balancing act that he needed to kind of navigate in order to appease the party versus South Africans. But the truth is he needs to abandon the airy-fairy resolutions and ideas that the ANC has if it's to choose the country, if they're going to make the country work. And I think that they have to be realistic. And I think what Enoch said to Clement, saying, look, we can't continue beyond 2 years, that's the reality. He's looking at the books and he knows that we can't go any further. While the ANC has made resolutions that we want to move in this particular direction, I think they are slowly finding ways to say it's not workable. What the alliance wants is not workable. And I think he's always had to make the decision. And South Africa is in an increasingly difficult position where you can't dilly-dally any longer. You can't continue just trying to consult. Even though, again, in some areas, lots of areas, he continued to kick the ball a little bit further yesterday. We are moving closer and closer, I think, towards some kind of action that will hopefully put the country ahead of the ANC. The difficulty one imagines is that he has this conference at the end of the year. And I know Gwede Mantashe told you last night that there is no threat. I know Enoch, when you speak to him about the finances, says, look, I was prepared for last night's speech. I'm prepared for the things that the president said, and I'm just chilled and easy, and I'm going to balance the books in accordance with what is needed. I know they're putting on a really relaxed front, but I think that there's a lot of fast and furious kicking beneath the surface because they recognize that we actually are in trouble and they can't appease their parties any longer, really.
I think later on in this hour we're going to be talking about the underlying political message in Sona, of what happens internally in the ANC. But talking about Babalo, about cutting the president's locally made suit to match government's budgetary cloth.
Yeah, shoes and the suit.
Shoes and the suit.
Yeah, some people were being mean on Twitter saying, "Oh, is he really trying to impress us with his cheap suit?"
It's for suit. That's not nice.
No, it was a nice
It's
suit.
locally produced.
It's a
That's what
suit
matters.
than I ever have. But Babalo, the president spoke about unlocking regulations for government to do, for business to do business. A strong statement, and what John Steenhuisen said the first time he's heard this president say that the job of business is to create jobs, and the job of government is to create that environment. And he mentioned all these words and phrases that tick boxes in my head. And when it comes to the point of almost deregulating, pulling back the influence of bargaining councils, maybe even re-looking at labor legislation. But then I remembered, the president is still part of the ANC, which is in part of COSATU. Whether that would happen or not, the president does find himself in the tricky situation of probably want to pull back regulation that affects how small business does business. But still, the reality is, he's part of the ANC. He's part of the tripartite alliance.
Yes, indeed. I mean, he does have to, juggle that and make that balance. And as much as we do, appreciate the undertaking to, cut red tape for small, medium enterprises or small companies that require licenses to, function as and especially where city of authorities are the ones enforcing those bylaws. And maybe it's another task team that is set up, and maybe that might be disappointing for a lot of us, but cutting red tape and that undertaking, I can't imagine the ANC, being at odds with that, especially when these businesses are the ones that are supposed to be creating the employment.
Yeah. And speaking of that red tape, we started a conversation this morning on the open line, Mindy, about how he seems like he doesn't trust his ministers. So he's trying to create and concentrate these key responsibilities and bring in these key skills from the private sector to run the reform agenda. And I was asking the listeners, this is, to me, that sounds like a duplication of responsibilities. It's a parallel state. If you are bringing people from the private sector to come and run these reform agendas, what I'm picking up is you have lost confidence in your own cabinet ministers, because it's key responsibilities that are supposed to be driven by government, but it's been failing to do that. What do you make of the decision that even Mr. Nkosi is going to be the official red tape cutter concentrated in the presidency together with other advisory councils?
So I think there's two ways of looking at it, Clement. I think that the prevailing view, which we're seeing from a lot of opposition parties, the EFF in particular, is saying that this is a duplication. What's the point if you've got a minister of small business? Why are we now running a parallel state? Why is he centralizing everything? So I think that there will be the criticism of that, because there is this centralization. I think there's a sense that Cyril Ramaphosa is feeling like, well, if I'm going to get stuff done, I've just got to do it myself and not outsource it to the minister and bring guys in from the private sector. But there's another view of looking at this to say that this was very much how it was under the President Thabo Mbeki era, where there was a lot more centralization in the presidency. And then during Jacob Zuma's era, that was cut down quite a bit, because so much power went to super ministers and other cabinet ministers. So I did see that, like Richard Cullen, for example, was commenting to say, well, actually, this is a return to what things were like, and we could see this being quite effective because he is trying to take control of it. So I think there's two ways to look at this here.
Yeah, and when you talk about the superpower that ministers had, I'm thinking of people like Faith Mutambi, who were busy sharing confidential documents and cabinet information with people like the Gupta family. So I get that point. Looking at the politics of it, Sidi, to me it suggests that he's probably thinking, I can't fire these ministers, even though maybe I don't have confidence that they're able to lead this reform agenda, because I'm going to get a backlash from the ANC alliance. But what I can do is, let me keep them. It's still the patronage system, but I still need to get work done. And how do I do that? Let me bring in these people with key skills who are coming to lead this reform agenda I've been talking about for the past 4 years, but I've been failed by my ministers to implement.
But there's an argument to be made that at the end of the day, the implementation has to go via the DGs and the DDGs in the different ministries. So you don't trust the political heads, absolutely. But the administrative work that needs to be done still needs to be done through those ministries. You've centralized everything to presidency. And the other argument around what he's done is they are watching his own party members who want to have access to the power, patronage networks, if you may, are watching, and that is something that they will use against him. When you mention, Mandy mentioned former President Thabo Mbeki and how the system functioned on his watch, he was punished for it. In fact, the removal of former President Thabo Mbeki is something people in the ANC don't regret to date. In spite of what's happened to the country since then, they still firmly believe that Mbeki had to go because of the way he dealt with power, because of the way he dealt with ANC leaders around him. So that's not something they regret to date. So that tells you that when Ramaphosa goes that route, that kind of spells what's going to happen to this current president. The issue of a parallel state is something that is being spoken of within the walls of the ANC. So they are watching and they will use that against him.
Do you think there's going to be reaction from this inside the ANC? Is he going to pay for this decision?
He will absolutely be held to account for these kind of decisions. But most importantly, just looking at the speech and looking at specific things about the speech, first of all, the DA is incredibly happy.
Yeah, I mean, even Helen Zille was like, wow.
They're glowing. Natasha Mazzoni, John, they're happy about the speech. That in and of itself is an issue for some in the ANC already. The speech speaks about the July unrest where he says, we acknowledge and accept responsibility as cabinet. That is enough for them to call for him to go. They've been doing it when it happened last year. So now they've got the proof. They're saying, well, you admit that you take responsibility, your head must fall. Julius Malema, who's outside of the ANC but is seen as an extension of thoughts of the ANC, has already said he must resign. So absolutely they'll use it against him.
You are listening to a special broadcast of the Clement Manyathela show in the morning review on 702 and CapeTalk. It is Sona in 60 seconds. Tidi Maria, Babalo Ndenze, myself, Clement Manyathela, and Mandy Wiener on the line, broadcasting live as well as on Facebook. We're unpacking the 2022 State of the Nation address. We'll take your calls, your thoughts in the last quarter of the show, so you can get calling in or send your messages 072 702 1702 or 072 567 1567. Let's talk about accountability. Babalo, the president, I found this very, very interesting. He says that the final volume of the state capture report will be tabled, released end of this month. I will come to Parliament. I will deliver my response and my reaction and my program of action to Parliament, which was the call of opposition parties. Let's not send the report to the president, table it to Parliament. And now we're saying, well, in fact, I will come and deliver it to Parliament, which I think is a stand to say, I'm opening this process up.
Yes, indeed. And the president, did also make it quite clear. In fact, the minister and the presidents, I beg your pardon, Mondli Kongobele, about a week before the speech, he told me that, his credibility, he told the portfolio committee, I beg your pardon, Lester, that his credibility hinges on how it deals with these volumes that have been released and the final, state capture report, and what action is taken, whether recommendations, are met fully. So the president's credibility really does hinge on this. And he did make it quite clear that, whoever has been found, guilty of state capture will, face the full might of the law. So bringing it to Parliament, I imagine he was always planning to do that. And maybe those who are calling for him or calling for the report to go straight to Parliament and circumvent him may have spoken a bit too early, because the president, he's a consultant in chief. So, we kind of did expect him to make such a move to bring it to Parliament.
Mandy? The president says, with regard to state capture, those who are responsible will be held accountable. He called it a criminal network. A criminal network responsible for state capture. A criminal network which many would argue also sits within members of his broader organization, maybe even members of his administration. Your thoughts on the words "a criminal network of state capture"?
My sense from what the president said around state capture yesterday was a firm acknowledgement that there was state capture and that this thing is very, very real. And I have to give him kudos for the fact that he was so candid in speaking about state capture. I think it was one of the positives of the speech and what he said about it. He did say that no later than the 30th of June, he'll present a plan of action in response to the Commission's recommendations. I think we need urgency on that. And again, it comes down to prosecution. So I was very encouraged by what he said in terms of in enabling the NPA to work with the private sector. I think that's going to be a strength, and that we need to appoint a new head of the investigating directorate. All of this has to happen with urgency. It comes down to action. And we've got to see those that were named in the state capture report being acted against. And that includes members of his executive or senior members of the ANC. Then there needs to be that accountability, and he has to act as well. And then, of course, you know, Lester, where my allegiances lie, what he said last night about whistleblowers was hugely encouraging. The fact that we're going to see a change in legislation, that law enforcement agencies are looking at this, it's something I've been speaking about personally a lot. So I think he's saying the right things about corruption, about state capture. There's an awareness from him that this thing was very, very real. The damage was very, very real. But we want to see prosecutions. We want to see convictions. We can say it 1,000 times.
Yeah, and you can say the right things, but are you implementing and doing the right things? I think after the latest in Eyewitness news, I'll bring you in, Sidi, because I want us to pick up from where Mendy left off about the private sector helping. I asked the Minister of Justice about this last night and what regulations they're going to put into place to insulate the NPA. You don't want it to be seen to not to be independent. And it's not enough to be independent. You must be seen to be independent. So this private sector help, in what package is that coming in? And what is it going to do to the perception around the independence of the NPA? We'll get into that and some of the other key things that came out of the State of the Nation address. You're listening to Sona in 60 Minutes here on 702 and CapeTalk. It's exactly 10:30. Time for the latest in Eyewitness News headlines.
Thank you. A very good morning to you. The private sector has been urged to support government's efforts to fight corruption. President Cyril Ramaphosa has again vowed to take the fight to the perpetrators. These are just some of the commitments contained in the president's 6th State of the Nation address delivered last night. There's been yet another femicide in the country, this time in Mpumalanga. Police say the body of a young woman has been found near a school in the Bushbuck Ridge area. A man thought to be the father of the slain 20-year-old woman's child has since been arrested. And China has stopped buying beef, dairy products and beer from Lithuania. Relations between the two countries have been strained of late over the Baltic states' ties with Taiwan. These stories and more at 11 or as it happens.
EWN Traffic.
We've got Cape Town's traffic here. Traffic lights faulty. There's been an accident, or rather in Parklands at Sandown and Parklands Main, in Belhar at Stellenbosch Arterial and Adamtas, in Paula Park and Danafontein, as well as at Governmental, and there's been a collision at De Smet and Waterkant Road in Greenpoint.
Very warm welcome back. 29 minutes to 11 o'clock. You are listening to Sona in 60 Minutes. My colleagues, Clement, Manyathela, Mandy Wiener, Babalu and Denze, Tidimadia. You're unpacking the 2022 State of the Nation on CapeTalk and 702. We welcome your thoughts, your calls, 021 446 0567, or you can call in 011 883 0702. What did you think? Strong words on state capture? Strong words on accountability? Is it the president's job to say that there will be arrests? Manu, if you particularly look at the distance that the head of an executive needs to keep with an independent body like the National Prosecuting Authority. Also, lots of debate whether the private sector should be involved in prosecutions.
So it's not the president's responsibility to carry out prosecutions and to arrest people, but he can give the NPA the capability and better capacitate it. And all of the budgets, as Babalo will tell you, of the law enforcement agencies and the NPA have been cut. So we need to give them more money. So if we're going to say these things, we've got to make sure that we are properly capacitating them. And that's why I did find this comment that he made about allowing the NPA or enabling the NPA to work with the private sector with investigations and prosecutions, where we could see, counsel being brought in that are not part of the NPA to help with prosecuting complex commercial crimes, for example, or we could go to auditing firms and ask them to assist with some of the investigations. I think that is certainly a positive. I think it's what some people have been calling for, because we have to better capacitate the NPA. We cannot make this such a primary objective and speak about corruption and look at the Zondo report, and then you don't give the NPA capacity to actually go after the people responsible. It doesn't make any sense. So that's something that I would be looking for in the budget. If the president's serious about what he's saying, he's got to put his money where his mouth is.
And that will come out in the wash of not only Inogwanagwana's budget speech, but also departmental speeches. Babalo, and that's always been the argument from the NPA, from the Auditor General, from the Public Protector, from the judiciary itself. Can we truly be independent when our budgets are still largely controlled by a singular treasury and a parliamentary committee that decides how much money we get to perform our duties independently?
Yes, especially when you have, certain, like the VIP protection, for example. We've seen these cuts. Office of the Chief Justice, the judiciary, the Public Protector, the police have been complaining about budget cuts as well. We have, DNA testing kit shortages, which are, budgetary linked, and all sorts of other challenges. But then you have VIP protection getting, a bumped up budget in the very same year where we see these cuts. And I think that's where MPs should come in, as far as, deciding how to, share this budget and whether to approve budgets as committees and, speak to National Treasury about these budgets, especially for these key, law enforcement agencies like the NPA, as well as the Public Protector, which, handles, I think, ordinary complaints from so many members of the public.
And I guess, Sidi, what's going to be important is what regulations are they going to put in place to try and protect the independence of the NPA? Because, depending on how you do it, you may be opening a dangerous door here. So how government somehow insulates the NPA is going to be quite key in accepting and working with the private sector in trying to capacitate the NPA.
It is crucial. Remember, part and parcel of what the NPA's job is, and when it's successful, is how much trust it's able to garner from the public. Part and parcel of the problems of the NPA in the country is that it's been so damaged, it's had so many scandals, it's been scandalized to a point where the public itself doesn't necessarily believe in its abilities to do its job. So what you need to avoid is further question marks around how it's able to do its job. It's further ideas that somebody has a buy-in into what kind of prosecutions are successful or not. So they do need to think about that really carefully. I find it problematic that the minister would say to you last night, we're still kind of thinking about the regulations. By the time the president makes a speech, you must have an idea, a picture of what the regulations need to look like. And very quickly want to add on to the issue of whistleblowers that Mandy rightfully says is her passion project. And I think it's one that actually we should all be concerned about. But I think that the president was disingenuous yesterday to say, now we're going to do stuff about public whistleblowers. Whistleblowers have been killed in this country, time immemorial. The president did not need to wait for the Zondo Commission report to say, hey, there's a problem. People who want to step up in your fight against corruption, that's your ticket, eh? That's how you got to the top. People who want to try and expose that are being gunned down, are being killed everywhere, are fleeing the country. That kind of person should have stepped up a long time ago to try and speak about measures to protect their lives. So I struggle with certain things. He does really do a great PR job. He does know. President Ramaphosa knows how to speak well. He knows how to deliver a great speech. But the problems are when you poke holes into it, you realize, actually, you're playing us. I have a huge problem with that whistleblower comment. We did not need to wait for the State Capture Commission to understand what we need to do as a country.
And I remember probably a couple of years ago, and you'll probably know this better, Mendy, you have been talking to whistleblowers. You've written a book about it, The Whistleblowers, which people must just get if they want to understand really how difficult life is SOEs after blowing that whistle. But the regulations, the law that the government has been talking about in previous years, they've been taking long to implement it, and it's also been vague as well. That's why I'm so happy that the chair of the State Capture Commission recommends what and how clear that law needs to be in not only protecting whistleblowers but also incentivizing them, because a lot of them are struggling after they've blown the whistle. And corporate South Africa is like, we don't want to touch you, you're a problem.
Yeah, that's why I always speak about the fact that we need a societal revolution in this country about how we treat whistleblowers. It's not just about the legislation. So it's not just for the president to say that we're going to change the laws. It's the way that corporate South Africa is treating them, and just in general how we as South Africans treat them. Everyone loves a whistleblower as long as they're not blowing the whistle on us or on our company. Yes. And that's the problem that we've got here. So it's great to see these whistleblowers going to the State Capture Commission and putting their lives on the line, literally their livelihoods in the interests of the country, because they're doing their patriotic duty, and we applaud them, but no one's willing to actually help them and do anything. So I think that corporate South Africa needs to step up here, and regular South Africans need to step up here and make a difference. But having said that, I agree with Sidi that we shouldn't have waited so long. We do have the Protected Disclosures Act in South Africa. It was amended in 2017, but not nearly enough has been done. We haven't got an agency or an organization that supports whistleblowers. And I do think the profile of whistleblowers has really risen in the last couple of years because of the Zondo Commission, because of what's happened to Babita Deokaran, and just the media spotlight being on whistleblowers. But there have been whistleblowers for forever. You know, there've always been whistleblowers in South Africa, but I think as our corruption problem gets worse, we recognize the need for whistleblowers even more. And this needs to translate into action urgently. We've got to set up some kind of whistleblower agency or whistleblower house. We've got to see a change in legislation. So the president said the right thing here, and we're on the right track, and law enforcement agencies are looking at it, and he said it at the Zondo Commission, and he said it in his weekly newsletters. Let's actually change the law now and make a difference.
You're listening to Sona in 60 Minutes with Eyewitness News correspondents, reporters, hosts here, and also you, 072 702 1702 on 702, or here on CapeTalk, 072 567 1567. WhatsApp us, let us know what you thought of the state and nation. I think it's time to bring in some listener engagement here. Let's have a listen. What are your thoughts?
Guys, with regards to SONA and the government, I just need to bring forth some stark realities, is that the need for ARTA and to increase power generation was first talked about in the 90s. Where are we now? Thanks, John from Parktown.
The President's Commission on SOEs, Clement, to see what SOEs are still viable in the governmental and the state space. He's been speaking about this now for several State of the Nations already also, Tidi. Also waiting on a report back from that, Clement.
Yeah, and that I think probably 2 years ago, I remember filing for Eyewitness News about this SOE council that was supposed to review, and it's not just now. This is an announcement that was made a while back. But what has that done? What have they done? The Presidential SOE Council. It doesn't seem like they've done much to fix the problem. They're supposed to review the SOEs and say, okay, these are the ones that we should keep. These are the ones that are not working out. And I know that there has been criticism within the ANC alliance that, oh, hold up, this is an opportunity to privatize. Look at SAA, look at the energy reforms that we're seeing, and of course more private players coming in to help us with some additional capacity on the national grid. But we're waiting for that. The president announcing that that's still on the cards. They will be making a report soon on which SOEs are working, which are not working, and how do we fix those that are still critical in the developmental agenda of government.
But that's the balancing act that's costing the country I was speaking of earlier, where he knows what the alliance thinks, he knows what his comrades feel, how strongly they feel about certain movements, and so what we do is we keep kicking the ball, but South Africa can no longer sit and wait while he continues doing that. So the council doesn't do its job, it just exists, says to us, no, we are working towards something, we don't reach a conclusion in these consultations, and he keeps appeasing those people because we haven't moved anywhere, but South Africans are frustrated because we're not moving anywhere. And I think that's part of the problem with the president, is that you're stuck between what the country needs versus what the alliance dictates. And we're not going anywhere. South Africa continues suffering because of that dilemma that he faces. He needs to make up his mind about where he stands and move in a direction.
Speaking of a dilemma, Lester, you spoke to the police minister last night around accountability, because the president said something interesting last night about the operational failures and how there will be changes in the security structures. And I thought, was that a goodbye Kehla Sithole moment?
Yes.
From the heckles that I heard from that chamber, it was from opposition MPs who called for resign. I don't think it was directed at the president. It was directed at members of his cabinet, where he said the report into the circumstances leading into the July unrest came from not only operational failures, but also failures within cabinet. And I asked this of the police minister last night.
Well, fortunately for me, I don't come close in employing or seeing the commissioner exiting. The president talks about something he knows. He talks about that he's incompetence. It doesn't matter how painful it is for me to be with the National Commission. Nothing I can do about it. The only thing is to take the matters forward to the president. As president said, we'll be looking at the heads of the operational heads of this institution. Let's wait and hear what he's saying.
That's operational responsibility. Where's the political responsibility? Where does that lie?
President spoke about the operational responsibility. Indeed, there will have to be some element of the political responsibility. You can't just throw your hands in the air and say nothing happened on that particular day. The only thing will be decreased here. For instance, your report says about 6 top echelons of the crime intelligence are suspended. Let me assure you, the minister has got nothing to do with it.
Babali, you usually get the rumblings of any movement, any change in a government department, in a directorate, in a police. If you sit in committee meetings long enough, you start seeing and noticing who's asking the questions around whether a certain individual is fit for that particular role. Is this a precursor to the operational changes that we will see in the South African Police Service?
And yes, indeed. I mean, even, the calling into question this whole appointment process of a commissioner will also now be, an agenda item, I guess, of the portfolio committee of police as far as making those changes. So definitely, I mean, and we also know that, the appointment of the independent head of the IPID, there was a long debate, about the changes in how that appointment and how that person is disciplined. And, I remember there were, some other arguments from the police, from the police minister's side on these changes. Members of the opposition were in support of them, but not everyone was in support of these changes for IPID specifically. So now I think the police commissioner, we can also expect, some similar changes happening in that front, especially the appointment of a police commissioner.
And Mandy, and also how the institution of the South African police has also contributed to the broader question of state capture. State capture is not just about looting coffers and being exposed to favorable tenders, but also dismantling the power of the state. And we see that connection between that dismantling of the power of the state, also the impact and the influence of organized crime. The failure of the South African Police Service can also be seen as a symptom of state capture.
Yes, indeed. I mean, we were watching the fire in Parliament, sorry, beg your pardon, is one operational failure that, can't be ignored, because the police minister, even when it came to that in Parliament, they were demanding his presence, and he missed one meeting, joint committee meeting, and he came at the following meeting about a week later, and he was just not being able to account for those operational failures. And Ketlas Tole was the one sitting now, with the accountability in front of these members of parliament.
Mandy?
So look, I think that I think the president has got to act here on the outcomes of this July unrest report. And for me, the situation is simply untenable between the police minister and the police commissioner. And things cannot be sustainable. You can see the police minister is throwing Kekla Sithole under the bus here last night again in his comments. So the president's got to act against one of them or both of them. And we also have very short history, very short memories in this country. I mean, don't forget there was a board of inquiry into the fitness of Becky Cele's fitness to hold office when he was the National Police Commissioner. So just to remind you of that in case you may have forgotten about that. But yeah, Lester, back to what you were saying about the capture of the police service. The police service was very much a site of state capture. Very much. If you look at crime intelligence, the fact that crime intelligence has been hollowed out, eviscerated, it's had multiple heads over the past few years. We've had more heads of crime intelligence than we've had national commissioners. And what we can learn from that report into the July unrest is just how badly crime intelligence handled the whole thing, because there is no crime intelligence. It's just not effective. So that needs to be remedied. The president spoke about public policing and hiring more people. He has to ensure that there is stability brought to the police service. Yeah. And that means making sure that it is not politicized and that we restore the credibility of crime intelligence and the capacity.
Speaking of crime intelligence, actually I remember Becky Cele, during the July unrest, he was criticized for not allocating budget for crime intelligence. And his argument then was that, well, I could do it, but I've seen how this money has been looted.
Well, that's crazy.
Which is ridiculous. And now he's like, I can't even sign off on this budget because I know what's going to happen to it. What it's been happening to over the last couple of years. So when you talk about the capture, Mendy, it's been so deeply rooted. Remember Benning in Clement?
We come from far.
For me, the low point, what we've had 12 police commissioners in the last 27 years. I remember this interview, Ria Piecha, after her appointment. Shahan Rampkasoon of ENCA asked the police commissioner, are you qualified for this job to run the South African Police Service? And she said, well, it doesn't take a drunkard to run a bottle store. And it speaks to the necessary requirements of what we need in a competent police service. And 12,000 new police officers also being...
That's not even enough. The police minister told you yesterday that it's not even enough. The president says, yes, there's 12,000, but the police minister says we couldn't appoint 14,000 last year. So we still have a shortage.
But we're taking your calls 0214460567. John in Gardens, good morning. John in Gardens, are you there? Going once, going twice. John in Gardens is not there. Maddie, I have kids, you have kids. I would not promise my kids an ice cream date and give a set date. I would not ever say tomorrow at 4 o'clock we're going to get ice cream. Why would the president set himself his own target of 100 days to develop a plan to tackle poverty and address joblessness? And firstly, you go into government probably having a plan beforehand, but he's set his own target 100 days. I don't think for a politician that's necessarily wise to be setting your own targets, eh?
Well, Lester, clearly I've got this parenting thing wrong, because I would totally tell my kids that we are going for ice cream at 4 o'clock because that's when it's in my diary and it's the only time I actually have. So maybe I need some parenting tips from you, and the president could do the same.
And let's remember, guys, that even with that 100 days, it's to finalize a social compact. So it's not even to deliver on the commitments to create jobs.
So how do you define that, right?
Yeah.
So how do you define once? Okay, let's tick that one. We've got a social contract now. It's 100 days in. Let's look around the room. Okay, have you got a social contract with me? Excellent. So this is the thing that the president does all the time. He loves this idea of a social compact. and then a social contract. And then he likes to use this phrase. He used it during COVID-19 a lot, where we need the social compact, the social contract, where it's a partnership between the people and the state. I mean, he says it often. Consensus. So how do you even define in 100 days and put it in your calendar, Lester, we'll go for ice cream on that day with our kids, and then we'll decide then if we've got the social compact with the president and with the government.
Yeah, I must say, one of the things that got a lot of applause, and I must say, even from some of the colleagues that I will not mention, was the announcement around cannabis. The president stressing that, the cannabis industry, it's going to be industrialized. Government will be reviewing the regulatory framework. And I mean, a lot of people who are already in this business city will tell you that, we have been saying the regulation is taking us back. This has a potential to create thousands of jobs. Just ease that regulation.
Yes,
and I'm not confirming if it's you, Sidi, or not.
I hate the part where Clement goes, Sidi will tell you about the cannabis
Because she may or may have not been someone who was praising the president last night when he made this announcement.
Look, the part where he says 130,000 jobs could potentially come from this, we have to applaud as South Africans, because unemployment is an issue in the country. I think that there's always been, they've kind of lagged. The framework is a problem. They've kind of lagged in rising to, coming to the party, purely because this was always a great opportunity. In fact, there was a point where he was speaking last night about the Eastern Cape and KZN, where people for hundreds of years have been dealing with the product, saying, there's so much they can unleash from the product. I thought it was a bit of a joke, because here in the Western Cape, if I remember well, Alan Windy had kind of said, let's identify areas where we can actually tap into the hemp industry and do more. And I thought that's funny. Oscar Mabuyani in the Eastern Cape, where it's a well-known thing that you're dealing with the product, you're not moving, you're still consulting. But look at the Western Cape, they're moving ahead, they're forging ahead, you're falling behind. I think, and by the way, when you speak of hemp products, guys, we need to move beyond the space cookies and rolling a joint. Truth of the matter is, there's lots of products that you can get from hemp. Absolutely. Clothing, soaps, there's so much that we can tap into and do. It'll go down to CBD oil, right down to the issue of, right down to the issue of small leave me alone. Right down to the point of red tape.
I'm from Bondoland, so when you mentioned it, I was like, oh, okay. I know Oscar Mabuyane did touch on it in previous years, but nothing ever happens. There are so many regulatory issues, the licensing, and they really could learn from Ellen Windy, I'm sorry to say.
Well, Tito Mboweni has said this before. We need to take advantage of the quote-unquote this green thing. And you said that in 2 or 3 budget speeches ago. We need to take advantage of this green thing. It's a bit of a goofed story to tell, as I heard someone say.
But Lester, Alan Windy listened. And then you've got members of the governing party. The Eastern Cape, for me, it is the greatest travesty, where you are dealing with this issue and you're still consulting over it. Move!
But let's look at that, Babalu, from a parliamentary legislative point of view. 2-3 years ago, who would have thought that with a police culture where people have been arrested, and poor people have been arrested in the Eastern Cape as a subsistence crop, being arrested, crops damaged and destroyed. 3 years later, after Constitutional Court ruling, that in Parliament, public hearings late last year on a personal cannabis. Well, the wheels of probably moral change grind slowly. And here we are, not only a public consumption cannabis bill, but also let's open up the industry. Lesotho is doing it. Why not do it here? And that is the slow legislative change that we're seeing coming out of Parliament.
Yes, indeed. Maybe they should go back to the Con Court, and just get an outright unbanning of it, because it is quite specific on the amount you can have as a personal user, and whether people do abide by those regulations is another story. But really, I think that does confuse. Am I allowed to? Can I commercialize it? What's the limit? So I think we need clarity there.
Yeah, Mandy?
Look, it's very easy to, and Lester's particularly good at making jokes about this, right?
Yeah.
So I think it has been like one of the dominant narratives to come out of the speech. If somebody asked you, what did the president say last night? You're going to say he spoke about pot. I think that's what a lot of people are the takeaway. But the truth is, I think that it's a massive industry economically. And if you as you say, if you look at Lesotho and the kind of revenue that is being generated from the industry in Lesotho, sorry I'm being so serious about this, guys, but it really is a huge industry, and it's something that we could harness in terms of creating jobs and deregulating and industrializing, and it is something novel for us to look at. And I'm sure the president knows it's going to get plenty of headlines. It's going to be the kind of thing that people are going to focus on and maybe put too much attention on, away from the negatives maybe, which is why he put so much emphasis on it. But I think it is something that would make us some money and create jobs as well.
Well, it comes with the consequences of high office, Mr. President.
High office.
And
as Mandy said, Lester's got a ton of these.
And we wrap up this joint sitting
Nice one.
of Sona in 60 Minutes. My colleagues Mandy Wiener. Hopefully we'll see you in person next year here in Cape Town for Sona. Tidi Madia, Babalu Ndenzi. Clement, it's been a pleasure broadcasting.
Thank you, Lester.
Over the
It's
last
been lovely.
2 days. And thank you to you, our listeners. I'm sure during Clement, when he continues the Clement Manyathela show, me on the morning review here on Cape Talk, still taking your calls. 021 446 0567 011 883 0702. Thank you so much for joining us on Sona in 60 Minutes.
Africa Milane
on Cape Talk.
Weekday morning.